R2 back, of course, talking FF7 Rebirth. We're here with another interview with the devs. This comes from also like the Saudi Arabia kind of event they've been doing for a while here. It actually appears to be the same day that they did the DioARTS panel that we talked about, just because Gavin Poffley, the translator, and also Katase and Hamaguchi appear to be wearing the same clothes. They're doing the interview within the Rebirth exhibition that we've looked at and talked about a few times, because they have the buggy right next to them, and then obviously you can see the rest of it behind them. Now, the interview itself is kind of short. The VOD that's on the TrueGaming channel is only like 11 minutes. But there's a bit of an issue with the video because it's an Arabic gaming channel, so it's obviously meant for an Arabic audience. They're asking the questions to the devs in English, and there's like Arabic subtitles for what obviously the interviewer's saying. And off camera, because they don't show it within the VOD, Gavin would be doing the translation. So he'd be asking the questions to the devs in Japanese, and then we're seeing them answer in Japanese, and there's Arabic subtitles, but we don't get to see Gavin do like the English translation, right? So we have the questions in English, but not the answers in English. We are kind of subjected to translations of their answers, and I've tried to add subtitles to the video. Like there are auto-generated subtitles on YouTube, and it's worked before because we've done it before with other like interviews that are like only in Japanese and shit like that, but I couldn't get to work. I don't know why. I've ran it through VLC a few times with the SRT file, and it just doesn't add the subtitles to the video. I don't know what the problem is. I'm not a tech guy. Like, I'm just following guides online on how to do this shit, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know if it's VLC. I don't know if it's me. I don't know. I do know there's at least a few things to talk about from this interview, just because Shinra Arch did do a few translations on Twitter. I didn't actually look at those. I just seen them on my feed and seen that it was linking to this TrueGaming interview. But I did have somebody else hit me up on Twitter. Somebody, Cloud Strife or Ahmad on Twitter, who I think lives over there because he went to the exhibition and shit. He's been kind of helping me a little bit with like the Saudi stuff here the last couple weeks. He actually went out of his way to like translate all the answers for me. He said his English isn't like the best, but still, I appreciate the work. So we're going to look at his translations, and then we might go back and look at Shinra Arch's translations of like the few that they did. He did also say that he tried to shorten the answers a bit just to try to cover everything. Anyways, let's hop into it.
So, how did you feel about the reception of the game?
So Hamaguchi says, FF7 Rebirth is the second game of a trilogy, so we had to show the future of the trilogy through it. If we kept the same things from Remake, maybe some will enjoy it, but they'll be able to predict the outcome of the third game, and it won't have the same anticipation, so we had to make a bigger game. The game was loved, so we know we made the right decision. So it's kind of like a sort of a nothing question and answer. It's a common question they get in any sort of interview of like, what are your thoughts on the reception of the game? Because obviously Rebirth was pretty loved. You know, it's one of the highest rated Final Fantasy games ever, right? For a second there, for a little bit, it was the second highest rated, and then it fell down and tied with a bunch of others in the series. I will say that the part of like Hamaguchi talking about people being able to predict the outcome of the third game is kind of weird since this is based on the original FF7, right? I mean, there's obviously going to be different stuff along the way, like there has been in Remake and Rebirth. But ultimately, we are following the FF7 story, the original FF7, right? And while there have been differences here and there throughout the story, we're still kind of following the basic beats, so we know where the story's going to conclude, right? Like, it almost definitely end a similar way to the original FF7, right? We'll probably be fighting Safer Sephiroth at the end of the third game. Because they gave us Bizarre Sephiroth at the end of Rebirth, that almost guarantees Safer Sephiroth, plus that's such an iconic enemy. There's almost no way we're not fighting that. And then throughout the game, it'll almost be probably the same shit. Summon of Meteor, looking for the huge materia. Holy won't stop Meteor. Aerith/Livestream will help stop Meteor, crashing with the planet. That's more than likely what's going to happen. You can almost guarantee that shit.
Kita-san, you were the original director of the original Final Fantasy VII. So, how do you feel about the current version of the game? Like, do you think it's a replacement for the original, so, people don't need to play the original game, or you think this is more like a complement? So you would prefer for people to play the original game and then come to play the remake project, Remake and Rebirth, and then maybe they'll get more appreciation for the universe of the game.
I gotta agree with my guy here because this is a very good question. Katase says, this is the first time I've been asked such a question. No matter what my answer is, people will have different opinions about this matter. So personally, I don't think there is a right answer for this question. Some people will think the remake project is enough. You don't have to go to the OG anymore. Others will say you can play them both. I think everyone can think of it both ways. If you look at Star Wars, you have the original trilogy and the new ones, and every generation will put his own touch. I don't know, it's probably like a miscommunication there. And I want FF7 to have the same connection between the OG and the remakes. So yeah, again, I think this is a pretty good question. Like, it's a nice little thought piece. Once the remake project is done and we have like the whole FF7 story kind of remade, do you really need the OG FF7? Does somebody need to go play that? Or is like the remake project like a complement to the original? I would say like if you're just trying to get somebody like in the modern era to play and enjoy FF7, I think they'd be fine to play the remake trilogy. Now, I would still recommend the original because that's what I grew up playing. It's what made me fall in love with this world and these characters. I still think you can get a lot from the original FF7 regardless of like the time period that it came out. Next something we talked about, I think relatively recently, I think maybe from that DioARTS gaming panel that we looked at, and I think it was Katase that said something about like, how it's like hard for people to play like these older games, and that's part of why like they're doing the remake project or whatever. But like I had an argument against that, where like I've seen people in the modern era, people younger than me that were born fucking after FF7 came out, that have gone back and played the original FF7 with its polygon characters, and still very much were affected by the story. I would never look at the remake project as some sort of replacement for the original Final Fantasy VII, because I think there's still a lot to be gained from playing that game, experiencing that game. I also think that there can be some sort of benefit to playing the remake project first and then going back and playing the original Final Fantasy VII, because even though it's like a more like archaic version of the same story, you can appreciate it more if you've played this game with like all the voice acting and all like the realistic looking characters and graphics and shit. You can kind of put that shit in your mind as you're playing. Like, even though Cloud looks like he does, you're picturing Cloud from like remake, right? And you're picturing those voices saying the lines and shit. So you can do the flip of that too, right? You can play FF7 original first, like the majority of us did, play that shit growing up, and then go experience the remake project. So I think it's, I think it's a compliment. I think it just complements the original FF7, and they both complement each other in general. Also, I do think if you want to like fully appreciate the remake trilogy, you do need to kind of delve into the compilation, right? Because there's going to be a lot of like characters and references and just names and things that are mentioned, even if it's just like random NPC dialogue, that you're just not going to know who that is or what that is unless you've like played the original game or played Crisis Core, read some of the books, or all that other shit. Also, the second answer here is one of the answers that Shinra Arch tweeted out, so I think we're going to look over that really quickly just because it's a more like exact translation. Asked if FF7R is a replacement for the OG, in which case people don't need to play the OG, or if it's more like a compliment, preferring people play the OG and then play the remake project. Yoshinori Kitase said it really depends on how you look at it. He says that depending on the fan, both of those interpretations can be valid. Whether you view it as a new work repainting over an old one, or as a new work separate from the original, he thinks both of these interpretations are okay. There's no one correct answer. Kitase says it's like how a painting that was already completed can be painted over by the artist according to the time. The art shown constantly changes according to the artist's new feelings, and in that sense it's always evolving and being completed. He thinks you can find that in films as well. With Star Wars, George Lucas is always updating scenes with each new version, incorporating his current thoughts. In that sense, he personally feels it's good to interpret remake as something that's newly repainting FF7. So I thought that last bit was kind of funny just because, like, for one, I'm not like a Star Wars buff. I've seen some of the films. It's just not like a franchise I've got super into. But I feel like I've only ever heard like negative things about whenever George Lucas has gone back and like edited and updated the films and like added shit to them and altered things about them and shit. I feel like that's never been like positively received. I could be wrong on that. Again, I'm not like a fan of the franchise, but I feel like I've only ever heard negative shit in that regard. So it's kind of funny that Kitase would use that example. But also, I have some people point out on Twitter actually in the replies to like the Shinra Arch thread that like, if you were to paint over a painting, like say you paint something and you come back like 5-10 years later or whatever and you paint over it, like that erases it, that replaces it. That's a definitive statement, right? You can't view that original painting anymore because you painted over it. So it is kind of a weird thing that Kitase uses as an example. I think a better example would have been like just saying a painter doing the same painting again later. Like I paint something and then like 10 years later or whatever, I do the same painting again. I don't paint over the original painting. I just try to do the same painting now with like my 10 years of experience.
So my question is for Hamaguchi-san. Sure. As the director of the game, do you prefer to focus more on gameplay elements or on storytelling elements in game design process, or both?
Hamaguchi says, we can't ignore the fact that it is a video game, so the gameplay is very important, and it is really hard to balance the gameplay and the story as a Final Fantasy developer and try to do what the fans want. And what they expect as Final Fantasy fans is the story to be the core of the game, so we need to take the story and make it into good gameplay elements. For example, when we received the first draft from the story from Nojima, The Legend, I felt that the main theme of the story was the characters' relationships. That's how we came up with the affinity system for the battles and the story, like the gold saucer dates. The idea is all these aspects should exist in every part of the game, and the same will happen in the next game as well. It is a bit of a weird question because as the director of the game, your focus is on both, right? You got to focus on both. It can't just be one or the other. You can't just focus on the story and like maybe the gameplay is half-assed or vice versa, right? Like, so it's kind of a strange question because as the director, he's going to say both, which is kind of what his answer was. And this also is an answer that Shinra Arch did a translation for, but the thing is their translation's a lot shorter versus that paragraph we just read. So I'm glad that we read that first. Now we're gonna hop into like the Shinra Arch translation really quickly. So they say, FF7 Rebirth director Naoki Yamaguchi says the theme of Part 2 was bonds, which they worked into all aspects of the game, and that with Part 3, they've extracted a keyword from Nojima's core plot and are designing the game around it. So yeah, like the theme of Rebirth was bonds, like the affection affinity system, right? The whether that's like the side questing, the questing in general, and obviously the synergy system where you build up your bonds with your characters and eventually go on a date with one of the characters. There's going to be something, they're doing like a similar thing for the third game where they're pulling like keyword from like Nojima's script for the third game and kind of basing the whole game around that. Now, what the keyword's going to be, it's kind of hard to guess right now, right? There are some good suggestions from people under the Shinra Arch tweet talking about like identity and acceptance and things like that. That could work, obviously, for Cloud. Obviously, identity is a big part of the FF7 story, and that's going to come to a conclusion with the third game. We're also going to have, like, a broken Cloud at some point in the third game. So that could work. I don't know how that'd work for, like, overall for the game, for gameplay elements and shit. But that could work at least for the story stuff. And actually, speaking of that really quickly, I do wonder how they're going to do the third game. Are they going to do the affection system again? The affinity system, whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm assuming we're going to have side quests and stuff, but, like, you do side quests with, like, Barrett, and it raises his affection, but it's like, okay, that's cool. What is the payoff of that? Because the payoff in Rebirth is the date, obviously, but if we're going to have the affection system again in the third game, what is the payoff? Is it the Highwind scene? Do I get to fuck whoever I have the highest affection with? If we get the highest affection with Tifa, we know what's happening under the Highwind. Like, you could have the payoff be the Highwind segment and have like an intimate scene with the character, and I don't mean intimate in like a sexual way, joking aside, right? Like, have like just some sort of intimate conversation between like Cloud and whoever the character is with the highest affection. But I do think the conversation between Cloud and Tifa is important. We can joke about the sex shit all the time, but like the conversation they have and the moment they share is very important to both characters. And in the narrative, all the other characters are supposed to like go off and do their own shit, except for the ones that hang out on the Highwind, right? So I don't know exactly what you do if you bring this affection system back. I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, moving on, the next question, the fourth question that they're asked, is about Arabic localization, which isn't something we got to spend a lot of time on, obviously. But this is something they were asked, I think, also with the DioGaming panel they did. But I do think it is a fair and important question, right? Because the whole point of this shit that we're talking about right here, like them doing this interview in general, is they're trying to move into like the Arabic market, right? They're doing these interviews and this big exhibition and shit over in Saudi Arabia, but it's like, I'm trying to sell my games to you, but I'm not going to sell the games to you in your language. That is kind of fucked up. So I do think it's a fair question to be asked, and there is obviously a big market there. It's the whole point of this whole event happening, right? The esports World Cup that's happening over there, and the whole like gaming district they're building over there in Riyadh and shit, right? So like, there's obviously a massive market there. So I do think it's worth looking into to put their games into like Arabic language, I guess.
I wanted to ask about the different regions that were in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Honestly, I was surprised compared to the first game how big and how massive the game was and how exciting the exploration was. So I was thinking, did you develop the regions, like did you have small teams, every team, every group of people dedicated to developing a single region, and then the work came together, or the work did progress from one region to another from the game's location?
Hamaguchi says, my view of developing games which I used in Rebirth is to imagine the whole picture of the game, like how big the world will be, how many locations will the game have, gameplay aspects in every region. If you look at it that way, it'll be easier for you to know how many developers you need to work on every region and how much time they need on it. But the only bad thing is this plan makes it harder for me to check on every team separately, but it is easier for everyone else to do his best that way. So that to me makes a bit of sense. I mean, I'm not a game developer, but I think it makes more sense to have like multiple teams working on multiple regions, right? Like, maybe you could get like one area done faster. Like say you had 100 developers and you had all of them working on the Grasslands area, the first area, right, in Rebirth. Like, yeah, you could probably get that done in a relatively timely manner. Then there'd be no progress on the Junon area, right? So I think it makes more sense to do, have a team of guys here, Grasslands, team of guys here, Junon, team of guys here, Corel region, so on and so forth.
I feel that maybe there wasn't struggle as much as maybe we thought, going from the kind of linear Final Fantasy VII Remake to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And this seems very impressive to me, honestly.
We'll read the translation of the answer here really quickly, but I don't quite know what he's asking. The translation seems to say that he was saying it looked like it was easy to make. I don't know if that's a mistranslation from my guy or from Gavin Poffley mishearing what the guy's saying. I don't know, because I don't think anybody looks at Rebirth and thinks that it's like easy to make. Samaguchi says, I'm happy to hear that it looks that easy, but trust me, it was difficult, but I'm happy to hear we did an easy and flawless job. I already spoke about how linear Remake was, which was not what the fans wanted. Of course, there were some gameplay elements existed in Remake. We took the basis with new additions, like the synergy and all the new mechanics, and then the open world and the exploring in the world map. And what are we going to add to it? Which will take us to the previous question about planning with our team. It might look easy, but it was hard. But the fact that it looks easy from the outside, it means we did a great job. See, I don't quite know what the guy's question is. It's kind of hard to make out what he's saying sometimes. At the end, he definitely says that something's quite impressive to him. But overall, I'm not entirely sure what the question is. But I don't think, if they're talking about the development of Remake or how Remake looks, I don't think anybody thinks that it, again, was easy to make. But overall, my dudes, that is pretty much the video. It's a lot longer than I thought it'd be, which happens a lot on the channel, but it was only like 6 questions in a very short video, right? 11-minute video. So I thought this would be like a sub 10-minute video, but for some reason it is much longer than that. Again, shout out to my boy Cloud Strife, the Cloud Strife himself, for hooking me up with some translations, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to really look at this interview. We'd only really have the few that Shinra Arch did translations for, right? Which is kind of cool. Kept you guys long enough. This is my 3rd video in a row, I think, right? The 3rd daily upload, so you've had enough of me. We'll end the video here. That's the video. Subscribe to if you guys are new, so Snorks in the description below. Follow me to -YT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more. And nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.